Robby, what's on your radar today?
Well, Brianna, and then there were none. That's the name of a famous detective novel by the acclaimed mystery author Agatha Christie, and it's also the fate of all words and phrases that could possibly be viewed by the most delicate, sensitive people as somehow offensive. Indeed, Christie's books are getting the same treatment as works of fiction by celebrated writers like the James Bond author Ian Fleming and also Roald Dahl. Now, we actually discussed this on Rising a few weeks ago. Here's a refresher on some of those changes. The book publisher Puffin is rewriting Roald Dahl's classic children's books so his literature can, quote, continue to be enjoyed by all today. Edits have been made to change descriptions of the characters' physical appearances, including Augustus Gloop being changed to enormous instead of fat, and Mrs. Twit is no longer ugly and beastly. She's just beastly. In his book, The Witches, a paragraph explaining that witches are bald beneath their wigs ends with a new line, there are plenty of other reasons why women might wear wigs, and there is certainly nothing wrong with that. Gender-neutral terms have been added as well. The Oompa Loompas from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory were described as small men. Now they are small people. And the Cloud Men from James and the Giant Peach are now cloud people. Well, now it's happening to Agatha Christie, according to the Daily Mail. And some of these changes are baffling. Christie's publisher, HarperCollins, is removing insults, okay, and also references to ethnicity. Now, some references to ethnicity are insulting. In one passage, a judge is described as having an Indian temper, so that's gone. But in other passages, Christie's merely describing characters' ethnicities, not in a mocking or a racist way, but just in order to give readers a more complete mental picture of the character in question. For instance, in the book Death on the Nile, some characters are described as Nubian. Nubians are an ethnic group in northern Africa, in Egypt. It's not an insult to describe someone like that, nor is it an insult to describe a Jewish character as a Jew, as Christie does in her debut novel, The Mysterious Affair at Styles. A servant character described as black is no longer identified as such, and references to a character's beautiful white teeth, now they're just beautiful teeth, as if describing them as white was reinforcing some racist idea. I think we're reading too much into that. Why are we doing this? Who is demanding that? Who's demanding that great books no longer include any details about characters' appearances or ethnicity? Should we no longer acknowledge someone for being white or African or Indian or Jewish at all? Liberal progressives are currently outraged about Republican attempts to remove LGBT references from books that appear in public school classrooms. Democrats have described a law aimed at doing this in Florida as the Don't Say Gay bill. And I think that law is bad. But publishers sanitizing their bookshelves are doing the same thing. Don't say black, don't say Jew, so on. Readers are not demanding these changes to the extent anyone wants them. It's progressive, liberal sensitivity readers, the publishing industry's glorified DEI consultants. The author, Kat Rosenfeld, described this class of censors thusly. The rise of sensitivity reading seems to reflect an obsession with policing language in service of a hypothetical person who's not only maximally sensitive, but also not very smart. At a moment of ascendant identitarianism in so many institutions, sensitivity readers seem part of a larger, insidious trend in the arts, one that stigmatizes imagination and would, taken to its logical conclusion, make fiction itself categorically impossible. And while Christie, Fleming, and Dahl are already published authors, there are so many writers whose work will never see the light of day or will get killed off at some point in the publishing process because a sensitivity reader decrees that they're the wrong sort of person to tell the story. Educational and cultural institutions should not outsource publishing decisions to the most unreasonable people in the entire world. And we should not seek to make the written word so sanitized, so uninteresting, that it fails to provoke anyone. They're not making literature better. Case closed. So more of these kinds of changes. And in this case, they were just changing a lot of, not all the time, but mostly they're just changing just descriptions of people.
Yeah, I mean, so I first heard about this morning. I saw a tweet from a friend of mine. We used to work together at Current Affairs magazine, a lefty socialist mag. So this is, as far as I've seen, oh, and she was agreeing with you that,
yes,
that this sanitation shouldn't happen. So this seems like your point is right. Who is asking for this? It doesn't seem like anybody normal across the ideological spectrum really wants this to happen. It does seem to be this kind of DEI push within the publishing world, which is, again, this problem that keeps coming up with DEI. It seems to be designed to protect the interest, kind of the legal interest of publishers, businesses, things like that, as opposed to actually trying to get at any sort of equality in the real world or actually protect the interests of employees, which is ostensibly why HR should really be there. Of course it isn't. So you're getting these weird misfires where they're changing norms, they're editing text for an audience that doesn't really want it, only to create outrage, and outrage that frankly is backlash against leftists who don't even agree with these kinds of policies. So from my perspective, it's very frustrating indeed. Right,
it ends up humiliating. It makes progressives and leftists look bad, even though they're not calling for it.
No one's calling for it.
No one's calling for it.
I will say that it's perfectly, I haven't read these books and I don't know in the entire context of all of these changes that have been made, but it's perfectly fair for individuals to take offense at things that are in books, to decide that they don't want to read those books to their children or offer them up to their children, to, if I were a parent that suffered from alopecia or some other kind of, condition that caused me to be bald, or maybe I just wear a wig for fun, and I saw a certain kind of language and didn't want my kid to internalize that, or if my kid was bald and had to wear a wig because of some kind of condition, you can make those kind of decisions on a case-by-case basis. But I think, and I felt this way about the monuments when people wanted to tear the monuments down after Charlottesville too. There is something that is actually giving a pass to sentiments of yesteryear, to erase them from history in that way. And I would rather engage with them head on and talk about why I do or do not agree with something from the past than basically pretend the bad thing never existed. Because there's another movement happening in this country right now, of course, where in Florida in particular, there's efforts to erase certain books from the curriculum, erase entire disciplines like African American history from the AP studies opportunities that students have there. Change the Rosa Parks story into a story about a woman who just happened to sit on a bus and get kicked off for no reason, not erased. We're not talking about why. And I think that's more dangerous than someone calling someone fat in a book.
Well, that's why I wanted to make that comparison, because it felt a little bit, I was trying to get you on my side. Yeah, I agree with you a little bit on that stuff, more than a little bit on that stuff. And this felt similarly like trying to, again, it's not, the books don't have, they're mystery novels. They don't really have an agenda necessarily. I mean, you can critique the time period they were written in, whatever, but the publisher's removing just descriptions of characters that just add some kind of detail to, oh, this is a Jewish person, this is an African person, this is that it's not, it's like almost assuming, I guess, that Christie, because she was a product of a distant time period, had some ill intention toward those people, but it's not, you got to really read it into the text. It's not actually there. And it's akin to not encountering the kind of LGBT content or something in that some schools do. No, we can't have kids being exposed. Well, it's just descriptions. It's not necessarily advocating for a kind of lifestyle or ethnicity. It's just telling you more about the person.
For sure. Look, I don't want to act naive about the fact that there are ways that people tend to use language that connote derision. Not in every case, and certainly not with a historical gloss on it, the way we're talking about these older books here. But we all know, kind of raise an eyebrow if someone refers to someone as, this Jew yesterday versus a Jewish person yesterday. Let's not pretend that we don't know what the context is of why these kind of changes are going to be being made. That black instead of a black person. We know that these words.
Well, but the respectable way to say those things has changed over time. Like now, if you said the blacks, that would sound kind of offensive, but that was not. You're supposed to say African American. Now you're supposed to be a person of color. It changes.
Correct.
Right?
Yes. All I'm saying is I do want to acknowledge that I understand the purpose behind some of these changes. I'm not going to pretend that it's completely innocuous with some of this languages. But yeah, it's in a historical context. To the extent that people are offended or confused, I would rather they talk through it if they're giving it to a kid or teaching it to a new audience that doesn't understand. Talk through it. Talk about how language changes. And honestly, I think that's really much more productive because we're all continuing to be in a process of language changing. Language and norms will continue to change. And the more people realize that those changes can happen without damning everyone in the past, I think the more flexible people will be about future language changes that we're in the midst of now.
I got to get you into Agatha Christie. She's fantastic. I'm a big fan. The Murder of Roger Ackroyd is my favorite Christie book. It has a fantastic twist in it.
All right, I'm open to it, Robby.
All right. Well, we'll have more Rising right after this.